State lawmakers are moving forward with a bill that would allow Floridians to carry concealed firearms without needing a license. A Senate panel today approved the bill, which now is ready to be taken up by the full chamber. It's identical to the House version of the bill sponsored by North Central Florida State Representative Chuck Brannon. Under current law, getting a concealed carry license requires training courses and background checks. The sponsor of the Senate version says this will enhance school safety and allow law-abiding citizens to defend themselves.
As an ardent believer in individual gun rights, we simply cannot risk snatching defeat from the jaws of victory because of an all-or-nothing approach. That is a bad tactical and strategic approach.
The removal of a training requirement has drawn strong objections from Democrats and gun control advocates.
I'm absolutely terrified of what this legislation is going to do to our state. Florida is already in a gun violence crisis. Children are dying and communities are devastated. It's downright shameful to push forward this dangerous legislation that will eliminate our decades-long permitting system.
The Florida Sheriff Association and the Florida Police Chiefs Association are among the groups supporting the proposal.